Ahoy! Today we're talking about old Loki and new Loki, and we're going to compare them in every regard basically, regarding their laning phases, their late game, their different abilities and how that all functions together, and also of course which one I think is better and how. A little disclaimer beforehand, the footage that you'll see will not exactly be the best examples. That's because out of the 9 games I played, 6 had an AFK the other day, so I didn't get that much great footage and I want to keep that for some other Loki stuff that I still have coming up. So I blame matchmaking for that one, and to make up for it, check the bottom of the description. If you're quick, then you might get something nice. Now let's talk about the changes. The first thing that I want to preemptively mention basically is the split push potential. I think this was part of the core identity of old Loki, so I would classify his old split push potential as high. He wasn't necessarily always the best split pusher, but especially when the backdoor protection removal was changed, he became one of the better options. New Loki still has some of that split push potential, because technically his decoy in a way still exists, but the clear is significantly lowered, it doesn't take tower aggro anymore, so overall I would say his new split push potential is low to medium at best. And that has a fundamental impact on what you need to do with the character as well. Now let's talk a little bit about the different stages of the game. When it comes to early game, let's first have a look at the traditional way that Loki was played was typically in solo. Here his clear used to be very safe, and the entire laning phase was very passive. You were basically just leveling your decoy and looking to push with your decoy, and very rarely engaging unless you had a very squishy lane opponent or specific leverage that allowed you to do that. If anything, you were looking to rotate out and go for other targets. With new Loki, the clearing requires a lot more active involvement, because the 2 alone has weaker clear and you need to use your 3 as well. But you also get some more zoning and trading potential in return. Your enemy has to stay out of the area of the decoy entirely if they want to avoid taking any damage from that. And if they are close to your minions, you can use your 3 to hit both the minions and your enemy. This does still not make for massive boxing in lane though, it's just small perks, and you will also be able to rotate less because your decoy doesn't do all the work for you. So generally speaking, for a laning Loki there are more downsides than upsides here. When it comes to jungling, however, you had more issues beforehand. Old Loki had this awkward early game that forced you to either go for Golden Blade or for maxing your decoy out, which in either case resulted in relatively slow clear at the start of the game and very low early game aggression potential. With new Loki, you have good clear at any point of the match if you level him right. He's still not the most aggressive early game jungler for sure, because a lot of his damage is over multiple instances. You can't really burst enemies as effectively as others can, but it is significantly better than before. That's because you're not forced into Golden Blade and you're not forced to level the decoy. In mid game, things changed a little bit. Old Loki really required some items to come online fully, and he also potentially needed to stack. That depended on what build you went for, but if you went for Transcendence, then stacking was kind of a must. New Loki generally comes online earlier, especially due to the changed leveling order as well. He can have different impact on fights in various ways. Especially his viability in 2v2 or 3v3 scenarios is significantly increased, especially with the decoy and general AoE damage, and that is something that you will see mostly around mid-game, so that is something that he can most certainly work with better than beforehand. Now you could argue that shifts in later mid-game when his ability leveling is more evened out between old and new Loki, but then we can already talk about late game at that point. In late game, old Loki has high burst, strong split push potential, relatively bad teamfight potential, and is squishy. So he's either a glass cannon or a split pusher. New Loki has slightly less burst, though still high burst at late stages. He has better teamfight impact, he has worse split push, and he's still squishy. In both scenarios you have a squishy who best takes out other squishies, but old Loki does that a little bit better. Playing around the teamfight utility hinges a lot both on the situation you're in, so for example if you're getting pressured, then new Loki can do a little bit more, and also what allies you have. If you have a lot of CC, then you can set up your 2 better, and that will overall give him more aggression impact as well. So ironically, new Loki is way more of a team player and also a team dependent player. Now let's look a little bit at the individual abilities. First, we have to obviously mention that his basic attack scaling was changed. Old Loki had 0.8 on the first hit and New Loki has 1. That is a huge buff, though it is just a revert, that most certainly has a significant impact on his damage, because that was what really sent Loki over the edge. He wasn't a competitive pick before, but he was performing way better before this nerf happened, so reverting this is actually in itself a huge buff. Now, Vanish on any reasonable level of play was hardly changed. I would say the changes here are almost insignificant. Technically, the ability was almost buffed a little bit through the basic attack change, because you're using this in combination with the basic attack, so it might actually have more overall damage output in some situations. His second ability was a Decoy, is now Agonizing Visions. The old version had usage for PvE, I already described that. It allowed you to body block in PvP a little bit, and it came with basic attack cancels and minor area denial. The new version has less usage for PvE, it is just a weaker clear, but it still body blocks and it still allows you to AA cancel, and it also now has a stronger area denial and more teamfight potential due to the blind, but in 1v1s especially, it would also just do a little bit of extra damage, like very low extra damage numbers, as long as the enemy reliably runs out. You can combo this with your ultimate to force enemies to stay in it, but that also makes you easier to counter at the same time. Overall, I would say the new version is better in most use cases, but not significantly better, only a little bit. His third ability was Aim Strike, is now Flurry Strike. On Old Loki, this was an instant cancel with high burst and a 25% slow. Sometimes this was actually the highest damage spike in the kit if you factor in the basic attack cancels, which is why some Loki players preferred leveling this over the ultimate. The ability also came with an 8-second cooldown at max rank, meaning it was up multiple times in some fights. The new version is a long channel with AoE damage. Under some circumstances, depending on your items in later stages of the game, this actually does less damage than just basic attacking instead. It does, however, apply a 30% slow after the last hit and goes into an immediate basic attack cancel afterwards. It comes with a 12-second cooldown, so significantly longer than before, but it also comes with significantly better jungle clear due to the AoE part of it. The ability has a longer range now, so it can be used in some situations to confirm a slow on someone you could otherwise not reach. Then again, if you were closer than before with the old 3, you could confirm the slow much quicker. It also can now be used as a knock-up and knock-back immunity to counter certain ultimates. This is something that I think not many players use effectively yet because it's something so new, but it works in a similar way to, say, Thor or Fenrir or Daji in that regard. In my opinion, the ability is worse in almost any use case for PvP, with notable exceptions if you're not in range or you want to knock-back, knock-up immune someone. What it's really better for is jungling, because it's just a better early game ability for that and it frees you off the shackles of G-Blade or Decoy. So really what this ability primarily does better now is allowing you to have a better transition into mid-game as a jungler. And of course we also have his ultimate, Assassinate. The old version was almost unavoidable burst and CC with high-ish damage, though not particularly high damage by assassin standards if you look at other ultimates. The new version has slightly higher burst overall, still not the highest burst, but that is offset by a longer animation. So it likely still does less damage in the same time frame. If you factor in that with the old Loki, you would have an additional basic attack in by the time it's finished. It has significantly better AoE CC that can be relatively reliably landed with some practice. I'll have a guide for that soon to explain how exactly you can confirm that in most cases. Generally speaking, the old is definitely better against single targets, while the new old can shine in teamfights, but it's a bit hard to make full use of it unless enemies are close enough together. When it comes to the playstyle, old Loki had a very standardized combo, relatively inflexible builds, and a very selfish playstyle. The new version of Loki comes with a more variable combo. It's almost unclear at times which ability you want to use or if you just want to keep using basic attacks. He comes with more flexible builds and a semi-selfish playstyle that can work well with allies, or you can just choose to still do the single target squishy burst, and he does that pretty well still. So in conclusion, is New Loki better? I think that strongly depends on your definition of better. The basic attack damage increase on the first hit helps him maintain viability while weakening key aspects of his old kit, so he's kind of getting a buff through a passive part and then some other nerfs. The added utility can offset these nerfs, but only if you fully utilize it. This will be especially hard to execute for people who are very used to previous Loki and have to unlearn years and years of muscle memory and their old playstyle, as part of that will no longer function as well with the new version of Loki. You have to get used to the fact that sometimes you don't want to use your 3, you have to get used to the fact that sometimes you have to move around while you're still ulting instead of just having your ult confirmed immediately and things like that, and that's not something that you unlearn in a single day. Now, does New Loki still need buffs at this point? I would say it's very likely. On Casual Smite, we can already see that his performance has dropped by 2 to 3% in every mode except Conquest, where he had an increase of 0.23%, so it's barely worth mentioning. This is obviously due to a massive influx of Loki players. He's the most popular god in Conquest right now, for example, and many of them don't play Loki as well as the veterans that were the ones playing Loki before this. I do think that Hi-Rez want Loki to perform better than in his previous state, more around a 50% win rate. They just want to be very careful with the changes because overbuffing Loki is something that a lot of people would be very upset about. I imagine he'll see gradual tweaks over time. I could imagine, for example, a scaling slow on his 3, where every tick slows by 5%, or slight damage increases to the ticks off his 3, maybe his 2 as well, and maybe some adjustments to the ultimate too. Not all at once, of course, but those are the levers they can pull in order to buff him a little bit here and there without making him completely overwhelming. And also, of course, he's banned from ranked at the moment, so we haven't seen his performance at higher levels of play yet, which is also going to be interesting. If you want to learn how to play Loki, I have a Loki guide coming up very soon, so feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell if you're new, so you get notified of that, as well as a very interesting collaboration that is coming out soon. With that, thank you guys very much for watching, I hope to see you for the next one soon. DukeSloth, out.